it should look like an Ocean's 11 sort of caper cast, right? Where it's like, all right, I need the grease man. I need the hustler. I need the demolition expert. I don't know, right? Like, you should look at your team that way and build it that way.
Welcome, Al. Great to meet you. Great to have you on the podcast. I want to talk today about mistakes that startup CTOs make. What do you feel are, say, the top 5? Maybe we'll start with the top 1 and take it from there.
So the one that I really see the most, probably the one that junior, like early leaders, first-time leaders make a lot, is not really understanding how to scale the whole pipeline. Right, and so a lot of first-time leaders, first-time CTOs, potentially that have graduated up through the ranks, so to speak. They're developers, right? So the instinct is, hey, more horsepower. Let's throw more developers at it, and that'll be fine. Like, we'll just have this army of developers, and we'll crank things out. And that's not how it works, right? In anything beyond sort of the garage stage of a startup, you're building product. And that's a pipeline. There's stakeholder management, there's product management, design, there's certainly QA, DevOps deployment. And so that's a pipeline. And if you just scale one pinch point of it, then it actually causes more damage than it really solves. Now things are just breaking. Team members are frustrated. And so I think that's really sort of the entry level. You can always sort of vet somebody that's been there and done it versus somebody that's new. Is like when they go to scale. I always say, like, I come into a new company that I didn't start, but like I'm coming in and it's early and I'm starting to scale it. First thing I do is, okay, do I need to hire a QA person or a product person? Because either the beginning of this funnel is pinched or the end of this funnel is pinched. And it's hilarious because you talk to then the CEOs and other leadership that come from non-technical, and again, their expectation is going to come in and hire devs. And I'm like, no, I'm going to increase dev output by hiring this guy over here who's not a dev. And they're like, what? But you do it, and the pipeline opens, and the capacity increases, and you get the effect. And I think that's the first sort of sidestep or the misstep that first timers make.
Okay, awesome. So I said we weren't going to talk about AI, and we're less than 3 minutes in. And I'm going to have to point out.
I thought of it. I thought the same thing. I was like, should I comment on AI here? But I won't. I'll let you.
Yeah, you're talking about it's a mistake that first-time leaders make. Right, we'll have more dev resource and ignoring all the rest of the bottlenecks in the system. And I'm sorry, I could not but help think of AI there. It's exactly the same when everyone comes along, the CEO or whatever, and says, we're going to use AI, we're going to produce more code, we'll write code faster. It's missing all those bottlenecks, isn't it? That it's not just writing code faster. We need stuff from the stakeholder faster. Of what are we going to like? What are we going to build? Why are we going to build it? Who's going to care? How are we going to leverage it? It's, as you say, can we deploy it? Can we test it? Can we ship it? Can we document it? Can we provide it to the customers? Can the customers handle us delivering more quicker? It's that classic mistake, whether it's throwing more people into the mix as developers or throwing AI into it.
I've got one thing on that because I totally agree with you, but I think what's so interesting about that parallel is that AI is really suffering a little bit, like AI adoption and sort of the tool chaining is suffering a little bit of the same paradigm fail in focusing solely on, like a development-based model, right? And I think what's interesting is, like all things AI, it's developing very quickly. And so now where I think people are really seeing capacity is now that these agentic workflows are actually focusing on, I need a product agent, I need a QA agent, I need a validation agent for these specs. And as the tool, they're doing the same sort of thing that we do in real life, where it's like, hey, let's figure out the steps of the process, the full life cycle, and let's truly, enhance that, not just let's crank these 50,000 line PRs, right, in an hour. And I think it's the same sort of growth stages that AI is going through that is natural for, traditional teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And so much of the talk about AI misses the fact that it can do more than just coding. And one of the things I've been trying recently is taking my high-level requirements and producing a detailed set. And I've been moderately successful with that, hitting another bottleneck with that now. But I remember early in my career sitting down to write a system, and we'd spend 6 to 9 months talking about what was needed, interviewing the customer, writing this 600-page requirements document, capturing it all in some structured format, trying to understand if it was all relevant, if it was all consistent. I can now put in some high-level requirements, go back and forth, have the AI ask me questions, and produce 50, 60-page requirements. A smaller system, but of that standard in a few hours. Still got the same problem with the bottleneck of trying to understand it, make sure it's logically consistent and meets actually what we want. But it's incredibly powerful for that. And that was a lot of the hard bit. And while I wouldn't trust AI to be 100% accurate on reviewing that in terms of if it's consistent, I don't trust myself to either, because a 50-page requirement spec that says the system must do this when this happens. You can't read all 50 pages, hold it in your head, and properly evaluate if it's consistent. So the AI might make mistakes too, but it's another tool we can use to evaluate that and look at that, and we can produce those a bit quicker, and go through and evaluate those ideas and figure them out so much quicker. So there's a lot of places where it could be used to handle some of those bottlenecks that we're not really talking about properly yet, or as you say, we're just discovering and suggesting agents for.
Yeah, fully agree. I think that's really where it's going to get unlocked, and I feel like we're right there. Like the next 6 months are going to be pretty wild. Just how that all develops. I mean, 6 months in an AI timeline is like 5 years. I mean, it's crazy. I've never seen anything like it in my career. Just the pace of change is something I've never seen.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's incredible. Going back then to CTO,
all right,
what would be the next mistake that you think that they make?
So sort of in the same general vein of this, really something that a lot of early career or less experienced leaders make is, again, it's this having these stovepipe sort of views of what's important. And so in addition to sort of just focusing on development, I find that a lot of times they just focus on the team and not the development environment. And so they're hiring, they go out there, and even if they think about balance, they go and they hire that product person that I'm saying, or the QA person, they scale their dev team. So let's just assume they're scaling the pipeline. It's just as important to focus those cycles on your development, the environment side of the SDLC. And so what'll happen that I'll see is hire the right people, the right team, and then everybody's frustrated, right? Because they don't have good tooling on the product side, right? They're not using project planning or Atlassian, Jira. I mean, I'm not going to even, that's a whole other podcast, but they don't have a system that supports their paradigm. They don't have clean DevOps. They don't have good documented flows, because none of that stuff is fun or sexy, right? I think it is, but I'm clearly broken. But that's something that makes or breaks a team, because I've come into more turnaround situations where developers are just frustrated and unproductive, and it's something as stupid as tickets aren't there or poorly written, or they don't have the right QA flow, and so QA and them are always at odds. And it's like, as a leader, that's as important as the team. To me, that's 50-50. It's like team, systems together. Now you have the engine that runs product development, and it's just something that nobody seems to want to do, or it's easy to look over, and management doesn't want it, right? Because it's not features. So you got to carve out time to do it. It's just a very often missed thing. And normally that's where you hire some turnaround person. It's where you hire me later, because you're like, okay, we got 15 engineers and we can't deliver, and CEO's losing his mind, and boom, now you fix it. Like, you can do that early. It's so important to do it early. So much easier to do then.
I recognize that situation. Like you, I've been in those turnaround situations where you come in and you talk to the team, you talk to management, everyone's frustrated. Management are frustrated that the delivery, engineering are not delivering. Engineers are frustrated because they've got these stupid processes and things aren't working, and there's a clash with management. And half the time I find when I talk to people, I say, well, what is the problem? And they say, well, we have to do it this way. I say, do you? Who says you have to?
That's right.
It's the engineering process. It's you own it as engineers.
Yeah.
If it doesn't work, change it.
Yep.
Right, but management want us to. It's like, no, your management don't understand. They're non-technical. They're doing it because somebody set it up that way, and they think that's how it's got to be done to get results out of you. So talk to each other, change it. So yeah, I'm totally with you. I've come into so many organizations and just said, well, why are we doing it that way?
Mm-hmm.
Why can't we change it? And generally the answer comes back to, it's like, well, we've always done it that way. And
it's shrugs. It's this.
I don't know why we can't change it. So I'm like, cool, let's change it then. And if anyone shouts, they'll blame me.
Reminds me of one of my favorite stories. In my early days, I was in defense, which is very classic, old school, like big scale engineering. And they had a sort of a requirements parable that they would pass around. And it was a story of like, the mother and her daughter are cooking and they're making something and they've got this, whatever, they've got this roast, right? And so the first thing they do is they cut the roast in half into 2 pieces, put it on this, the pan, and they put it in the oven. And the daughter's like trying to learn. She's like, hey, why do we, not that I'm trying to be sexist, I guess it could be a son and a father cooking. I don't know, I don't want to be that guy, right? So they're cooking and, they put it in the oven and the, son goes to the father, why do we cut it in half, right? And he's like, I don't know. That was the way Grandpa always did it. And so they go and ask Grandpa, hey, why is that an important part of the recipe to cut it in half? And talk to Grandpa, and Grandpa's like, oh, because that was the only way that it fit in the oven. Because the oven was so much smaller, And it's like, that's how these things happen and we just don't even know. And we feel smart about the things that we're doing because there's pedigree to it, but things change. The world changed, new tools, new things. We can bring it back to AI for again. No, I'm kidding. But it's you have to stay adaptive. And I think that's one of the core functions as a CTO, certainly, is it's certainly not just dev and productivity. Like, you're running an organization, you're building an organization, you're scaling, and you're responsible for these things. And just saying it's the way it's always been done or it's good enough, like, that's unacceptable.
Yeah, and I think there's a trick people miss in hiring there as well. There's a lot of the talk about diversity misses the fact that we do want that diverse background of people, because we want people that, if we're a small startup, maybe having somebody from big tech or a big enterprise would be good, because maybe they've seen different ways of doing things that we can bring in that diverse thought, and they can say, well, why do you do it this way? And then maybe that causes you to just pause and wait, well, why do we? And let's change it. Or maybe they can come in and say, well, at big tech company X, we did it this way. And you can say, well, fine, if you've got 10,000 engineers, that works. We're 10 engineers. It's a different... But having that diversity and causing that discussion and those questions often surfaces things that, as you say, you identify a chance to remove the friction. You identify a way to change the process, and you just start asking the questions. And that makes things normal. I mean, so many times I've come into organizations and fixed them, not because I've come in with the answers, but because I've come in and just said, why?
Yeah. It's so poignant, and I'm glad you said that, because I think that's actually the magic. I always tell people, I'm like, there's no magic. The magic is just that mindset. My favorite tool is 5 whys. Just because, like, that's normally the route, and especially in a startup, because there's just no time. There's no time. It's pressure, it's speed, and scale-ups are really no different, just later in the process. But it's the same issue. And what's curious, and much just like you said, asking those questions uncovers things, but you have to take the time to do it and have the willingness to then respond to whatever the answer is, and take that time to do it. And it's funny because startups never have the time. Startup scale-ups never have the time. And then enterprise claims that there's inertia. And so there's just never any time. And so you just have to, that's part of your role. You just got to do it. You got to fight for that time. You got to carve it out. You have to ask the questions. Kind of like you said earlier, blame me. Like, this has to be done. Like, own it and just get it done. Because the results you'll be vindicated in the results every time.
Yeah.
Even if it's a battle.
To pull on that thread about enterprises, I think the thing that people forget of enterprises is they're not really that different. They still don't have the time. They have more work that they want to do than... The only difference is they've had that extra, whatever, is N years it turns you from a startup and scale up to being an enterprise. for all those things that were good ideas to now become just habits. We do them because that's how we've always done it. And I think about one of the enterprises I worked in finance. The company was about 40 years old. Some of the technology infrastructure was, code written 30 years ago. It still worked, still functioned. Nobody had any idea why it was done that way. I mean, the average tenure is about 2 years in a company. Code that's 30 years old, probably nobody's touched it for 10, 15 years. It just works quietly, happy way. There's going to be nobody that knew anybody that knew anybody that knew anybody that worked on it. It's
just dark corners.
It's always been that way. So, it just needs, again, asking why. You should say the 5 whys is a great way. So what's our next mistake then that CTOs make?
All right. So the next one, again, we're doing a good way. We're doing good at sort of segueing our way into each next one. So the next one is really playing off a little bit of something you said of sort of the team itself and the diversity and how important that is. And this is something, oh man, I've lived this. I see this in startups all the time. Probably one of the most prevalent is not focusing on that diversity in the early team and building it. I have a story where I joined this startup and it was very engineering heavy, engineering led. Focus was engineering. I mean, I want to say like 2/3, 3/4 of the staff was engineering. So just like heavy focus. Highest talent density I've probably ever worked with. Like everybody was an all-star A player. The thing tore itself apart. It did not work. It did not produce results equivalent to its capacity. And it's because it was too homogenous, right? And so I learned a really valuable lesson with that one, in that my paradigm for sort of team building is it should look like an Ocean's 11 sort of caper cast, right? Where it's like, all right, I need the grease man. I need the hustler. I need the demolition expert. I don't know, right? Like you should look at your team that way and build it that way, because you really don't ever know. Well, you do know, but like each moment's going to be different, right? And you're going to need, kind of putting it in my parlance, like there's days where you need your architect that it's like pulling teeth to get something through, because they're just going to pick it apart and analyze it down to the smallest detail. And like security, financial, stuff like that, like that's who you run through that. And then you just need those sales, consumer-facing bug fixes. And you're like, all right, gunslinger, you're up. I need something fast here. Like you're not going to complain if I ask you to turn this in 3 days. And so you build that team that's diverse, one. And then two, what you do is you build it with respect to the business. And this is something I always talk about when I come into an org that's more of a scale up than a startup, because that conversation is normally about really growing the team. So maybe you are going to double the team or triple the team over a couple of years. And so what I always say to them is like, okay, let's stop and let's think about this business, because a software team is sort of built for purpose. And it's like, does this business need, I always use a cars analogy, whether that plays or not, but like, do we need a dump truck for this business, or do we need a sports car? Because if I build this a sports car and then you're asking me to haul things around, and pick up groceries, then I've built the wrong thing for this business. And vice versa. If we're a sports car company and I built a dump truck, and no one's right or wrong. I think that's the important thing, is that most people go in and they think, oh, of course I want a sports car. Why wouldn't we just always build a sports car? And it's like, no. If I'm a large enterprise business in a sort of foundational industry like finance or healthcare, I want a proverbial dump truck. I want it to be secure. I want something rugged. I don't want something fast and loose that I could crash, just to really extend my analogy beyond reason. But you know what I'm saying? Like that's that part of it. So when you're building that team, a lot of people just think, I'm going to go hire the best people I can hire, regardless, just the most talented, whatever that means for them. And I'm just going to stack it with this sort of homogeneous view of what I think the prototype perfect employee is, without any thought of what the business needs. And then you get into this thing where now I'm at odds with the business because I can't do what the business needs with this team. It's a classic pitfall.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it really stands out in all these places that what you want is that generalist that's got some depth, and then you want all your generalists to have depth in different areas. So that way, people can be flexible and they can go and, in the startups, you have a lot of kind of holes in the dam that you need to go and stick your finger in. So you need people that can be flexible, that maybe today they're going to be doing something web and tomorrow they'll be doing something embedded, and day after that we're doing some customer support. But then they've got the depth in a few places so that across the team you cover things. I think a lot of people forget that. They go, we are building X technology, so we need a bunch of experts on X. And I've seen that with an AI startup I was involved in a few years ago. It's like, we need a bunch of people who are experts on X. Actually, this X part of AI we're building is like 5% of the product, because to actually make it into a product around it, you need a UI and you need a way of distributing it and you need a way of updating it and all this other stuff around it. So then you've got this expert in building this part of AI who's going, well, I don't know how to build a desktop application. I don't know how to write a client-server network protocol over TCP. And I'm not interested in that. I'm an expert in this. As you say, you need to build that team that can be flexible, and then where you have that true expertise as a differentiator for the business, you can put that expert doing their thing, and then you have the team around them that can flex and ebb and flow to support the rest of it.
And that's something that I've seen happen too, where diversity is a very multifaceted thing. It's not just, tech stacks or, backgrounds or anything like that necessarily. There's also different levels of just how people like to work. I always say, like, a business has sort of stratifications of work that needs to be done. And I had one business that I worked with that, long story of how they got there, but they had sort of a pretty healthy level of sort of SRE, more than sort of just normal. It was just part of how the business was set up and how it was run. And so I needed to make sure the team had people that would be willing to do that, because I can't take my architect and make them do SRE for days on end. I mean, they're literally going to quit. They will not do that. It's not what but there are people out there that like to do that kind of work. They love the consistency of it and just sort of the nature of it. And so there's somebody that's purpose-built for that sort of role. And I think that's the magic of a really talented leader, is somebody that can really see, like you said, sort of see what's needed by the business and then fill those holes specifically, not just generically throwing horsepower on the team. Like that's a surefire way. Like I said, that other startup is exactly what they did, and I have a case example of like abject failure around it. It just never works. It's not how teams really work in the real world.
So I think one problem we have for that is that there are too many teams that have been built in software engineering that aren't teams. There are a bunch of people working in the same room.
Yep.
Whether that room is virtual on a Slack channel or real in an office, but they're just a bunch of people in the same room. They're not actually working as a team. Somebody's handing them out tasks to do. They're doing tasks and then handing them back into, I've done my task. And that's not a team. We don't get the synergies. We don't get the sharing ideas, the shared learning, and all the other benefits that you genuinely get from playing as a team from that. And I still think that's too common in the software industry. Building software and building good software is a team sport. And a team is not a collection of people that are working on tickets in the same system. They're a bunch of people who are working together, helping each other up and lifting each other up and helping each other. And, spotting what is not being achieved in the team goals and then, rallying around to support that.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I find that one of my litmus tests for that, sort of coming into an organization, is look at task management. So let's just say it, they're Kanbaning or Scrumming, right? So you look at sort of the sprint board and in historical ticket work, and it's like, if you see tracks of ownership that are like really clear, it's always a surefire, like, it's like, okay, this person works in the inventory system. This person works on this part of the system. And if you notice, there's no interplay at all. Surefire sign that it's kind of like, it's a situation like you're saying. And a great way to address it for leaders is, and this is something I do, like, domain expertise is important, especially if you're moving fast. So I'm not like, you can't totally abandon it, not suggesting that, but I like to either pair people on certain tasks or somewhat arbitrarily cross tasks where it's like, all right, you're the inventory person, but now you are. And like, great, you're going to take the next 3 tickets in this area, and somebody else is, and kind of forcing that cross-pollination in the system. Not only is it just good from like, it forces teaming, because what's going to happen next? Person B is going to come to person A and be like, what did you do in here? And there's a whole conversation that's going to happen about sort of that handoff. But from a leadership perspective and looking at your team, you're building resiliency now, because you never know. Like, somebody might leave, somebody might whatever. Right? There's a whole host of reasons why that single-threadedness on domain expertise is a bad idea. And so you're kind of getting 2 wins here with that. You're creating that teaming environment like you're talking about by forcing this cross-pollination, and you're building a little bit of resiliency just sort of naturally, which I find helps.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have always liked being in companies that did that when I was junior in my career, because maybe it's just me, maybe I have a tiny bit of ADHD, but I got bored if somebody said, you are the guy that's building X. Yeah. I was like, well, we're building a whole system here. I want to know about all the bits of the system. I want to learn about it. I want to know how it fits in the business goals. So I liked it when somebody went, today you are the person responsible for inventory. Tomorrow you're the person responsible for e-commerce or whatever. I was like, great, cool, new domain to learn. I'm going to learn something.
Yeah.
I've also seen plenty of software engineers who are, this is my little box. I stay in it. I want to just be shut in this box. You feed tickets in and I'll do my work and go home. I think there's nothing wrong with that. If, we don't all have to be passionate about software. There are organizations that those people will fit in, and structures and processes that they'll fit in, and it will work for them and everyone will be happy. It's not normally a startup though. And I find that those people in a startup is a real mismatch. Sorry, you're going to say, Aaron?
No, I was just agreeing, just fully agreeing. Like, it's there's value there, and that's the team diversity, because if you've got somebody that loves to just do that, and that's going to be their life, and if you move them to something else, they're just going to want to burrow into that other thing. Like, just work with them, find that spot, build around it. Like, there's no wrong. Teams are a lot like Lego pieces. There's no wrong piece. It's just, what am I building, and where does that go, and how do I make the most out of that piece in this broader thing that I'm building? And I think getting too hung up on that is like, but you got to do the work as a leader. You got to do the work to understand, to see the bigger picture, to work with that. And as you said, I agree. Like, sometimes the fit's just bad. When I interview people for a team, when I'm working with startups, I like to, it's a life cycle where initially it's lots of interviewing, and then if I like them, it's a lot of selling of the business, like it sort of goes to space. But I always end with, all right, let's talk really about what this is. And I even maybe push it a little further than it probably is, right? Just a little bit of a scare tactic, because I want anybody that's going to join something like a startup to understand. It's true of any business, but acutely with a startup, because it's intense, is they should know what they're getting into. You should know what you're buying into. And if I haven't been clear during this process of, like, if you don't understand what you're getting into, please ask now. And let's talk about it, and let's make sure you're coming in eyes wide open, because there's probably a space for you if we've gotten to this point. But only if you've got to feel it too. Otherwise, it's not going to work. I'm sure you've seen that with hiring people. Like, people have this big dream and they come in and like, wow, startups suck. It's like, yeah, they can.
Yeah, the cost of a long hire is astronomical. Unfortunately, we only ever seem to talk about it as you hired somebody that's incompetent or wrong, and it's their fault for being the wrong person. We forget that actually the cost of the long hire is you could hire somebody brilliant and you've missold the role. It's not the right fit. They can be brilliant. They could be very clever, very successful, perfect fit for a role. But if you sold them on something that you haven't really got, you said, this is great. We're a startup, but we only work like 6 hours a day. It's dead easy. You'll have full control to do whatever you want. And then you come in and find that reality is it's not. It's, they're going to have to do the late hours. It's hard work. They don't have full control because, you've got a financial runway. You've got to ship some product and you've got to do something by certain dates. And we can't do whatever the hell we want because we're trying to find product market fit and validate it, then grow. So actually your ability to do whatever you want isn't there. It's, we have to do this to achieve the financial goals. We need to stay in business. It's a very different scenario. And if you've missold that, you've made the wrong hire. And it's very costly for you as a business. It's very costly for them. They've potentially quit another role, turned down other roles. They've potentially moved themselves or their family to be this role. So you don't want to do that to anyone. It's costly on both sides.
Yeah, and honestly, it never works out the way that we think it will. Like you said, it's not normally, in my experience at least, it's not normally I've hired somebody and they've just failed. That's kind of like a rare event where somebody comes in and just completely underperforms based on expectations, maybe a handful of times. And normally it's not the development side, it's the work ethic social side that is sort of the fail, right? It's not that they were misrepresenting talent. That's even rarer. But the common one is, like you said, you bring somebody in that's good and it just doesn't, the chemistry doesn't come together for them or for you. And those are the worst because you spend more time trying to turn it around. They normally spend more time, so it elongates the sunk cost associated with it. And then because they're normally, if they're good, you normally paid top dollar for them or to that end of it. And so the exit and the backfill is painful. And those are the ones that just will kill you. They really will kill you. And it's normally at like the senior and architect level where it's like, those ones are just savage.
Yeah. And the thing I hate about this when we see it normally discussed is everyone says they failed. I put them on a performance improvement plan.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, but if we hired them, if I hired somebody and 6 months later it's not working out, that is at least 50% my responsibility, probably
100%.
more. Because I was the one that made the decision to hire them and said, this is the right person. I sold them. They came in with less information than me. So, it's not that they failed. It's that you failed in hiring the wrong person into the wrong role, and you bear the brunt of responsibility. So we need to change the way people treat that.
I think that's hard for engineers. And I think that's a really, just naturally, it's not how we view problems. And I think that's a really great lesson for young leaders coming in is that you really have to view it that way. Because I fully agree. I've had the same experience. Whenever I've seen a miss, it's not like I chalk those up on my own internal sort of scoreboard. I'm like, dang, what did I miss? What did I miss in the interviewing process? What did I missell? How did we misconnect? I have a pretty firm belief that, you'll have the one oddity. Everybody's got one or two in their sort of leadership career of like, wow, that person was crazy. Just the Six Sigma events, of hiring. But I have a general belief everybody wants to work. Like they want to come in and they want to be a part of a team and they want to produce results. Generally engineers, I've never met an engineer and I'm like, wow, that person really does not care about producing, right? As like a general rule of like a missed hire. It's like they want to perform, you want them to perform. Like everybody has the right intentions. It doesn't mean it's going to work out, but everybody has the right intentions. So it's a dismissive and sort of counterproductive for your own career process to just be like, they were wrong. They messed up. They weren't a right fit. It's like you said, more than the majority of that's on you. And I really like what you just said. Is like you had the information in that arrangement. You had total. Maybe you didn't know a little bit extra about them, so maybe you had 70% of the information and they had 30. But they're the ones that are shooting blind on the majority of what's happening in that relationship. And so to say it was their fault is really passing on an opportunity to grow as a leader and to get better and be like have more wins. I think hiring was one of the most important factors of like a good leader in a startup scale up. Like if you're going to be hiring, you should as a CEO, you should have a technical leader that is excellent at hiring because it makes or breaks you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's maybe what we should count as the fourth lesson that every CTO needs to know, that the most important thing you do as a leader is building your team. That's hiring people and upskilling, developing the people you've already got. Those are the two most important things you can do as any leader. And that seems to be forgotten too often. And it's not like I'm saying something amazing that I thought of. There are so many leadership experts, there are so many case studies that demonstrate that the most successful businesses and the most successful leaders across a whole range of things, that's what they do. They find good people, they develop people. And there's countless studies over there that show the evidence of this time and time again, but we still don't ever seem to learn the lesson and take that in. So we have people that think that my job as a leader is to shout at people. My job as a leader is to say, this is how everything must work. My job as a leader is to X, Y, Z. And it's really find the right people or grow the right people, or better yet, a combination of both.
And that actually is great. That brings me to my fifth point, which I think is probably the number one mistake that leaders make, is that they don't make that transition that you just described. Is that as engineers, we come up through this path where none of those skills are relevant, right? As an individual contributor, it's about your technical prowess. It's about your ability to work with stakeholders, to architect software, to solve complex problems, to be up to speed on new technologies, synthesize things. Like I can go on, but none of it has to do with any of the skills that you just said. And so when making that transition to a leader, the number one mistake that they make is they don't make the transition. They see it as sort of a cost or a tax on being able to be in charge, which for most leaders that suck as technical leaders, what they really just want is to be the ultimate authority on the technology. And they realize that the only way they can do that is to pay this tax of, okay, I got to be responsible for building the team and hiring and building processes and all the other things we've spent 45 minutes talking about. They see that as a tax to be able to be in charge and be the lead architect and to own everything and to not have to answer to anybody, is their perception, I believe. And so that's the mistake that they made, because at the end, a really good leader has transitioned, and they see it the other way. All their technical skills are the tools that they use to do the other things, not vice versa. And I think that's the mistake that they make. If you're in the flow of development as a leader, boom, it's like it's broke. It's broke. I can tell you in a 5-second glance. Is there any PRs submitted by the leader? Yes, and you've got more than 3 people, you're broke. You're not going to scale. And I'm not saying don't be technical. What I'm saying is that in scaling, different responsibilities come into play, and that is a transition that you have to start and make. And again, all paths are different, but if you're ignoring it, it's going to hurt.
Yeah, I find it again so interesting that we've missed this. I totally agree, and it makes me think, as you were talking there about being in it, that must be nearly 30 years ago, just as I was starting my first business, somebody told me I had to read this book called The E-Myth.
Yeah, great book.
Yeah, and it must be nearly 40, 45 years old now. And the
Crazy to think about.
The E stands there for entrepreneur, for anyone that's listening. And the E-Myth was this myth of what makes successful entrepreneurs. How does somebody go from being a small business owner to a successful entrepreneur? And his whole thesis I boiled down to was, if you want to have a small business, you work in the business. If you want to be an entrepreneur and grow a business, you work on the business. So you've got to make that transition from working in the business to working on the business. And I think that beautifully sums up for me what a mistake that a lot of CTOs make, is that they're trying to work in the team. They're trying to work building the code, doing the architecture, and they need to work at that higher level of on the business. So on the engineering team and on the rest of the business, feeding the right stuff into the engineering team, whether that's resources, money, budget, to go and buy computing, to go and hire people, to go and do all the things that you've got to deliver, or whether it's quality, feedback from marketing, from your product organization, or however you're structured. It's getting all the right resources into that engineering department so you can be successful. It's not being in the department. The other great one that covered this, I think, was Patrick Lencioni in his book, it's got 5 Myths of a Team, or 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. So
another great one.
Great, look, understand that your first team when you're a CTO is not the engineering team. It is the CFO, the CEO, the rest of the C-suite. You are working with them on the business to how to execute. I think so many people miss that. And in a way, I can't blame them. I still see CEOs putting out job specs that say, looking for a CTO, you're going to lead our team of 20 people, you'll be 50% hands-on, And I'm just looking at those thinking, most of those are going to fail.
Oh, guaranteed to fail. I see them too, and it always kind of makes me laugh. And I think that's the discipline's getting better about sort of really creating space and understanding the roles between architect and VP of engineering versus CTO versus all these things. And I think that granularity is helping. I think there's still a lot of like, kind of like what you said, like it's a very transitive role. And I think that a lot of people don't want those roles. They think they do, but they don't want those roles. And so like I know so many technical leaders as they sort of come up, and like there's almost a negativity about being salesy or corporate or C-suite or whatever. Like you have to sell out to get there, right? Like, oh, you're not technical anymore. Like you're out of the family, and that happens. And you know we're not spring chickens, right? We've been in the industry a little bit. It used to be a lot worse, right? Like there really was this you're a sellout culture after you get sort of you're like, oh, you don't code anymore, you don't do, like, oh my goodness, he's not, you know, like your former peers are like dismissive of you, like, okay, go make a PowerPoint slide, you know. And so there's an identity crisis with that. Yeah, you've lived it, right? Like,
so true.
It's
so true.
And so those barriers are sort of breaking down, and I think that's good, because I think, to your point, the ones that are truly successful have achieved that layer of abstraction. They're working on the team, on the business. It doesn't mean you're not technical. In fact, your technical skills are what makes you that much better at picking the right people, building the right teams, building the right processes. But you have to be comfortable being abstracted. And I think a lot of leaders struggle becoming comfortable or internalizing and realizing that that's not what they want. And they force it. And so then they sit, it's classic, you've seen it. They're in a board meeting, they're in a C-suite meeting, and they always have their laptop and bang, you know, they're probably like, you know, doing PR, you know, PR reviews, stuff like that. Everybody's talking about really important business things that everybody needs to know. And like, they're just waiting for their status to come around where they just regurgitate, you know, whatever's going on in the sprint. Something a product manager or a scrum master could do. And it's like, you can't do that. Like, that's not the job.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean about that as you move to management. And I've got the double whammy because I did an MBA, so I'm one of those bean counters that doesn't understand tech.
You've tainted yourself, an MBA? Oh, I didn't know that. I don't know if I would have joined the podcast. It's a good thing you waited till the end to say that. But no, I'm pleased to say the world's changing fast around all that, but it's something that, you know, I think it's still a struggle out there. I still think it's an identity crisis issue that leaders have to sort of navigate and should seek mentorship, honestly. Like, if you're a young leader, you should go seek a mentor, somebody that's going to tell you, somebody that you respect is going to be like, no, that's fine. Yes, it's a lot of meetings. Yes, you don't get to write code as much.
I absolutely agree, Alan. There's another side of this, though, that I see. I did some work with a telco company 18 months ago or so. And they hired a chief architect that was going on to board meetings, and they were hiring a VP of engineering that was going to sit in that executive level as well. The chief architect was incredibly technical. I didn't really understand what he was talking about half the time. I think that's because he was smart and not bullshitting, but I'm going to...
Unverified.
Be generous there. The VP engineering spec that I saw horrified me because it wanted low-level details of understanding of UDP.
For a VP?
I was thinking, sorry?
For a VP.
Yeah, for a VP, to lead a 150-person organization. I went through the job spec, and I think it was, if I remember rightly, 75 lines in the job spec. 60 of them were about UDP, Java, network protocols, SS7, and I'm thinking, this is a senior software engineer you're trying to hire, not somebody to lead a 150-person organization and go along and contribute at the exec level to strategy. No wonder you've hired the architect, who it turns out later got fired, as I understand it, that is wrong and is leading you in a completely the wrong path for the business. You are hiring senior software engineers to executive level roles without that strategic input, without the recognition of what matters to the business, without the leadership experience, really, if you're looking for hands-on, deeply technical skills. And I was in a deeply technical role in consulting that organization. I'm thinking, I am not that technical here. Why are you hiring somebody that's going to lead the organization that is going to be more technical than people working? Absolutely crazy, and setting it up for failure. And I think parts of it at least seem to have failed since.
Yeah, I'm sure it played out exactly as you anticipated. Like it's
So how do we educate people to stop trying to hire CTOs, VPs on technical skills and instead actually hire the people that have the domain knowledge, the business knowledge, strategic knowledge, the ability to sit in a boardroom and contribute at the right level, the recognition that their first team is the C-suite?
I think this is a great question, and I think it's a really an acute question in the startup space, in this startup scale up space, because I think this is where it goes wrong the most often. And there's probably an equivalent top 5 for CEOs too, of it just goes up one level. But I think that the biggest issue is that, kind of like the team diversity stuff, that as a startup scale up, like your needs are different. And the thing that I normally find, and I've even been I've been on the inside of this where I've been hired maybe at the wrong time, right? Because you're like, okay, you always think top down. If I'm a technical company, I need a CTO. It's like, if you're pre-product market fit or exploring product market fit and you don't have a technical co-founder and you're not necessarily looking for a technical co-founder, do you need a CTO? Really? Like, no, you probably need somebody that you can generally label as head of engineering, you said this earlier, who's sort of your rock star generalist, is competent enough to sit in a room and have a human conversation, but then can turn around and create magic on the technical side. You bring them in and you work with them. And then you find, market fit potentially. And then you're probably looking at, this is when you should be thinking about architect, VP of engineering, with that low level sort of expertise, maybe somebody that can grow with the business, but is going to be majorly hands-on, but is, experienced. I don't care if you call him senior, VP, architect, doesn't matter. It's really just a experienced hands-on technical resource. And then I normally say pair that with a fractional CTO if you're going to raise and something like that. And then if you're post A, product market fit's clean, you're scaling, and everything's going well, and like I got board meetings every quarter, it's a full board now, and we're going to go for A, B, stuff like that, or follow-ons. Now you get a CTO, because now you know exactly what you need. I need somebody that's going to sit in this room with me, or sit in the room that preps for that room, and they're going to be responsible for all these things. They're going to translate for me and the board and everybody else strategy, and they're going to own all this stuff. Ownership's the most important part, and they're going to be that first team partner. And I think the problem is that's a lot. That's a lot to understand. That's a lot to do. And so it's much easier to just go, I'm going to hire CTO, whatever that is, and dump that all in somebody's lap. And then some poor technical person that's just excited to achieve that role says, I can do that. And, it's a collision course. And so I think the biggest thing is just to understand that you don't have to go from 0 to 60. And oh, by the way, same thing is true for every other discipline. Marketing, finance, like as a young company, you should be following the same thing. You don't hire a CFO, a veteran CFO like seed stage. You don't do that. Don't do that. Hire a really good controller that's just going to be able to go and actually do your chart of accounts, and then turn around and maybe slap together a pro forma with a little bit of help, right? And then you graduate to the VP, controller, and CFO. So it's the same. It's just in tech we think, it's the misnomer in tech is we go immediately to the best. I need the best, the highest, the top. And that's just not true. First off, it's not the way it works. Best is not the measure. It's not even the right parameter because it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, I'm laughing there because I literally worked with a startup that hired a CFO when they had 20 people. He just exited, I think, like a 500 million exit from a large enterprise. He was bored. He was out of his depth.
Yes.
He wasn't interested in talking about how do we do this with this 20K contract. That wasn't his level. It was such a mismatch of fits. Just to come back to what you said about that head of engineering and what we said earlier, The other thing there is don't make the mistake of getting your most senior engineer or your 25-year-old co-founder and immediately making them CTO, because they're your technical co-founder. They've probably done it because they're technical. They want to be building stuff. You said they might not want to go to that role. So if you make them technical co-founder or senior engineer or founding engineer or lead engineer, they can grow into that CTO later if it's what they want. You make them CTO immediately, you've capped off who you can hire because you're not going to be able to bring in somebody else without upsetting them. You position it so that the board might eventually then fire that person as the co-founder because they can't live up to that as you scale. And they're potentially now trapped in a role that they absolutely hate because they wanted to be building the product. They were the technical co-founder. They wanted to be technical, not be the guy that's going, oh, I'll prepare my board pack.
Exactly. And that happens even more often. And the sad part is that that's another thing with looking at that sort of staged growth is so important, because you do need some insight early. And what I've found that investors want to see early is they just want to see some ownership and some input. And they acknowledge the fact that certainly if they're putting money into a startup and they know what these salaries are, like they acknowledge that you're not going to need CTO level input daily as a young startup. So like if you bring in either an experienced advisor or a fractional or something like that, not only do you get that really cost-effective input early to satisfy what you need at that stage, but that's the mentoring opportunity. If I were advising a startup like that, I'd be like, listen, fractional CTO, if you've got a technical co-founder or a young technical person on the team that wants to achieve that role, fantastic. Have them mentor. Have them talk about it. See what it is. Have them spend a week shadowing some of these functions that they do and realize, does the board package excite you? Does trying to normalize a roadmap that doesn't fit excite you? Does hiring 6 people and not doing anything else other than phone screens and interviews, does that excite you? I mean, it did me, so it can for some, but, find out for yourself before you've got somebody, again, going back to our previous conversation, you've got the CTO with a laptop in the board meeting that's doing their best to just ignore everything that's happening. Like that's what you want to avoid, because that's where it is bad.
Yeah, that's where it fails, and that's where you have the other crazy situation I've seen where the CTO goes back to the engineering team and goes, management won't listen. I'm like,
hate that.
Sorry, you are CTO. You are the management.
I know. That's another sort of role miss there, and that's another. So like my 6 or 7, I don't know, it's further on the list, but like one of the things that I think CTOs make a mistake of is that they first team wrong. To your point, they think the first team is the engineering team for them, and I get that. There's pride and like, but it's very destructive, because what you do is the rest of the team sees the perspective that you've created, which is us versus them.
Yes.
And you end up isolating the team, and then you let cultures of like leadership and team sort of distrust creep in. I've seen teams do that, and then they start like this weird customer hate culture because they're just always dealing with the input, and the CTO is not like positioning that mental model properly, where it's like, we're building for our customers. We love our customers. And you have to fight that, because sales always wants things. Customers are reporting bugs. Like, you just don't get a lot of positive input, but you get a lot of proverbial negative input. And as a CTO, if you're like, ugh, and you're like creating this wall and sitting behind it, you're creating bad culture. Now the team's not integrated. The engineer's not going to go talk to the customer support person or the salesperson. They're going to be combative with them. And it's just really bad. It's bad team culture.
Absolutely. And we need that team to extend not just for engineering, but as you say, customer support, marketing, whatever, because the business is a team as well. We're all trying to achieve the same objectives. And
hopefully
those salespeople are your feedback of what should be on your roadmap. Because if you're building feature X and all the prospective customers asking for Y, stop building X. Start building Y. That is crucial information you want coming in. And you might be hating building X. It might be really difficult and something the team doesn't want to do. So that could be really useful information to course correct.
I totally agree.
Cool. And we have taken up a lot of time. So if you've got 2 or 3 minutes left, Aaron.
I do.
This, I think, leads a nice segue into move fast and break things. We talked briefly earlier that you think you should never follow it. I think it's a really good idea. And I'm going to take the lead here and say, I think it's a good idea because when you move fast and you talk to those salespeople and you get things out in front of a customer and break things, we get either the validation or the invalidation of our hypothesis that this is something worth building. So less of the break things, more of the move fast, get things in front of a customer and test your hypothesis. I'm very much in favor of that. And I think for a lot of cases, we can afford the error budget to make mistakes in that thing in order to get that feedback loop. So that's how I interpret the move fast and break things. And obviously it's very different if you're building avionics or stuff to control airways or things where people are going to get hurt when something breaks. But for a lot of the products that we're dealing with, that validation or invalidation hypothesis, I think, is so valuable that I'm prepared to tolerate a bit of an error budget. So are we talking about different things or are we in disagreement?
It's a good point of clarification. So I think it's important to normalize that because I agree, and I used to work in defense, and so there's certain industries that are just excluded from this. And so I definitely agree with that. I think we can all agree that, if you're writing software for Boeing, don't move fast, don't break anything. Like, I want to stay in the air. Yeah, please. Same thing with cars. So agree to exclude. So we're only talking about startups and like non-critical from that perspective. So here's my take on it. And I think you highlighted something that's really important too about the difference between the moving fast and the breaking things piece. Now, I don't want to get semantic on it, but what I find about this phrase, so I'm going to take it in whole, but a little more abstractly. We in software engineering love to take good concepts and just ruin them, if I'm being honest. And we have a deep pedigree of this. And so like comes to mind MVP as a concept and term, pretty thoroughly ruined now. Agile methodologies, pretty thoroughly, bastardized and ruined at this point. And I feel like the move fast and break things mantra is on that journey. I agree with the initial sort of hacker mentality of it and the learning and exploring, and let's not get too wrapped up in perfection because it's unachievable. I agree with that. What I've found is that much like sort of maybe MVP as a concept is the closest tied to where it's gone sour, is that it's become sort of mutated into this way to force teams to move as a lever for productivity, I guess is a better way to simplify it. And so what I hear a lot of times when I hear people talking about it is move fast and move fast. I still expect perfection because this is a production system. I've very rarely seen in environments that are like, oh, we'll move fast and break things. And then something breaks and they're like, what just happened there? Not in a curious mindset way, but in like, how could you let this escape go into production way? And so I think what happens is that in its purest form, it's great. But as a leader and somebody that's coming into, you just got to be careful because sometimes I feel like it's sort of a Trojan contract to try and tease out productivity from a team that's not really promised. So my rule of thumb, and I'm curious what your thought on this is that I think it's actually life cycle phase. I think if you're pre-product market fit, it is the way to live. It should be your like guiding principle, right? Because you don't know anything. What are you breaking? You have no customers, right? Like the break, to your point, what was the term you used? The risk.
You want to be validating your hypothesis, make sure we're building the right thing. So getting as many experiments out there as possible and validating them or invalidating them. Error budget.
Error budget, thank you. I love that. I've never heard that before. I like that. I'm going to steal that.
Credit to Google and their SRE book.
Well, that goes to show. That tracks. But the error budget, like that is very small. I mean, or that investment is right where you'd want it, pre-product market fit. But my rule of thumb is if you have customers, that's fundamentally changed. And I see too many engineering organizations use that. So leaders use it to eke out capacity with a false promise. This is the negative implications. And then engineering teams use it the same way that we used to use Agile in the early days. We're like, oh, we don't have to plan anything. We're Agile, right? Like, don't ask me for a plan. Don't ask me for, a roadmap. We're Agile. We got to, every 2 weeks we change our minds. And so there's these bastardizations where they use it for negative impacts. And I feel like the move fast, break things in engineering sometimes is a mantra to be like, we're not going to have strict processes, right?
Yes.
Stuff breaks, guys. Don't bother us. Like we're Facebook. We move fast and we break things. So expect errors, expect issues. And I think there's certain life cycle stages where, as an engineering team, that shouldn't be acceptable.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree on that. Cool. Thank you very much, Alan. I think I'd better let you go now. We've overrun a little bit. So to wrap this up,
it's been fun.
If anyone would like to follow up with you and ask any following questions, how can they contact you? And don't worry about sparing any links. We'll put the URLs and stuff in the show notes. So what's the best way for people to reach out and get in touch?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. So I'm sure, I can share my profile through there. Love having conversations on LinkedIn about all these topics. And, feel free to direct message me and with any questions or reach out. It'd be great.
Awesome. We'll put the link in the show notes. Thank you very much, Aaron. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a real pleasure. I really, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
You're welcome. I hope you enjoyed that episode of Coding Chats. If you did, please like and subscribe. And feel free to check out these other videos on a similar topic.